Good morning, everybody coming in. I am gonna just pull up the PowerPoint and I'll give everyone maybe one more minute to continue to join the Zoom, and then I will get started.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so if you checked out my announcement and remember what we discussed the last time, I feel like it's probably most beneficial to you if you can either have like a printed hard copy of the study outlines in front of you, or at least pull them up at the same time as you're on the Zoom on your computer. I am going to start with the first one. So if you go into D2L and you see the two Unit 2 sections, the first part of Unit 2 covers the lymphatic system and the second part covers the respiratory system. I am going to start with the lymphatic system, and it's pretty short, so I think I will be able to fill in all of the parts of that outline that aren't already filled in for you. So I'll go through that quickly to start, and then maybe we'll take a little break and we'll hit the respiratory system outline after that. Another thing I just wanted to say is it does seem like you guys did take my advice for how to study for the exam, because you did really, really well on it. I mean, I've taught AMP2, well, I've taught it like for a long, long time, but in like this environment, I've taught it every semester where we've been like either web conferencing or online, and the grades were like especially high this time. So I was really pleased with that. I mean, honestly, the test questions do come really right from the study outline. So if you can use that as like your guide, and then use these lectures, use the lectures that are recorded already for you in D2L, like the little short ones that I have in there. And then the textbook maybe to fill in any missing things. That's really like the best way to do it. So it looks like that worked for you if you did follow that advice. If not, and if you have any concerns about the test or you know, other study hints that you might need, just please let me know and I would be happy to help or discuss things with you. All right, so let's start with the lymphatic system outline. I do have it pulled up, what I've provided for you guys on my computer. So I'm going to go through that using the PowerPoint that I'm showing right now, just to help fill in some of the gaps here. So starting with page 1, you already do have the main components of the lymphatic system listed for you. There are lymphatic vessels that are located throughout the body, which are kind of similar to veins. And they basically collect excess fluid that has leaked out of blood vessels, which is actually a normal thing. That's not something weird that shouldn't happen. That happens all the time. So the lymphatic vessels collect that excess fluid and ultimately return that fluid to the blood, which is where it came from. So that's the job of the lymphatic vessels. Then there's lymph itself, and that's the name for that fluid that has leaked out of blood vessels. And once it's contained within the lymphatic vessels, it's referred to as a lymph. So it's just like a really watery fluid. And then lymph nodes, these cleanse and filter lymph as the lymph passes through lymphatic vessels. All right. So with that together with several different lymphatic organs, that we will go through towards the end of this outline. Together, these things form the lymphatic system, and they are part of, or they work together with the immune system. Okay, so for the functions of the lymphatic system, this, oops, I forgot to advance my slide. For functions, this is not filled in, so you'll want to fill this in as I go through the definitions. Number one, it helps to drain excess interstitial fluid. So basically it removes excess fluid surrounding tissues and returns it to the blood. Okay, so just helps to drain excess fluid that is located around your tissues within your body and returns that excess fluid to the blood. Also, lymphatic system helps to carry lipids that were like ingested and then absorbed. So what you can add here is that lymphatic vessels transport lipids that have been absorbed by the digestive tract into the blood.
Can you repeat that again for me? Sorry.
The lymphatic vessels transport lipids that have been absorbed by your digestive tract into the blood. And then the third function is to perform immune responses. Lymphoid tissue and the lymphocytes within it. So lymphoid, also known as lymphatic tissue, and the lymphocytes within it. So those are a type of white blood cell, which we'll talk about in a minute. So lymphoid tissues and lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, they initiate a response to abnormal cells.
You said they initiate what again?
A response. So they will respond to like anything that seems abnormal, like it doesn't belong in the body. They'll respond to it to get it out.
So they'll initiate a response.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so we're going to go through the components of the lymphatic system one at a time. We're going to start with the lymphatic vessels. And I had just kind of started to explain in the beginning that it is normal for some fluid to leak out of the blood as it's passing through your blood vessels, specifically as it's passing through the capillaries, because the capillaries are the blood vessels that are the most permeable. They have like little spaces in their walls. They only have one layer made of one layer of tissue, so their walls are thin. It's much easier for fluid to escape from that type of blood vessel. So that happens all the time on a daily basis. There is some fluid that's leaking out of the blood and it's moving into interstitial spaces. So that's just the spaces surrounding your cells and your tissues in your body. So once that fluid leaks out of the blood, it's called interstitial fluid. And it is the function of these lymphatic vessels to collect excess interstitial fluid and return it to the bloodstream. So the order of flow of lymph is that it first goes into lymphatic capillaries. Those are the smallest lymphatic vessels, then into collecting vessels, then into lymphatic trunks. And then finally into the largest of the lymphatic vessels, which are called lymphatic ducts. So we'll go through those 4 types of lymphatic vessels one at a time. You can see the order of them here in the PowerPoint. So first we start with the lymphatic capillaries. And this is where you have a space for a description in your outline. And you can write that these are microscopic. So they're very small. They're microscopic, open-ended vessels that collect excess interstitial fluid.
Can you repeat that again, please?
Yeah, they, I forget exactly what I said, but they're microscopic. So they're you can't see them with the naked eye. They are open-ended vessels that they will drain any excess interstitial fluid from around your tissues.
So are we using collect and drain interchangeably?
Yeah, I mean, just that you know what those terms mean, right? So, I mean, I'm just talking here. I don't have a set thing written down, but like do you understand what I'm saying? Like it's
collecting, right? So is it like it's collecting it to drain it basically?
Well, so I mean the same thing. Like it's
Okay.
pulling it out of one area. It's taking it away from that area. It's located around your tissues. So it's however you want to, whatever verb you want to use, it's collecting it, it's draining it, it's pulling it out, it's removing it. So as long as you understand what's happening, you can use really any term. So it's taking it out of that area and it's moving into these lymphatic vessels.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. And just one thing, when I say that they're open-ended, it means that it's like a straw. So at the end of a straw, there's an opening, right? So think of it as like a straw, like you stick a straw into an area where there's liquid and you're like sucking it up, like you're draining, you're removing that fluid from an area by kind of sucking it up. So that's what's happening. These are open-ended vessels that look kind of like a straw. So here's a lymphatic capillary, and here's the opening at the bottom that fluid can just move up into. Okay, there is one special type of lymphatic capillary that are called lacteals. So just know that these are a special kind of capillary, special kind of lymphatic capillary. And they're located only in the small intestine. Okay, and what happens, you guys may not know this, but what happens in the small intestine is that's pretty much where all of your absorption of nutrients occurs. Like after you've ingested food and it goes into the stomach, and then from there it goes into the small intestine. It's right there where nutrients are being absorbed. And one of those nutrients is lipids. So what you have already written down in your outline is that the lymph that is coming out of the small intestine, lymph that's coming from this area, actually looks white rather than clear. Lymph typically is just a clear fluid, but it looks white here because it contains lipids that have just been absorbed from the digestive tract. So there is a special name for this lymph just right here in this that's draining out of the small intestine. And it's called chyle, C-H-Y-L-E. You have that term written in your outline. So only in the small intestine, you have a special name for the lymphatic capillaries. They're called lacteals, and a special name for the lymph. It's called chyle. Other than that, everywhere else in the body, it's just the normal lymphatic capillaries, and the fluid within them is called lymph. Okay, so after the lymphatic capillaries, then they are connected to the next type of lymphatic vessel, which if you scroll down a little bit or look down in your outline a little bit, you will see lymphatic collecting vessels. These are really similar to veins. They have the same layers in their wall, but their walls are a little bit thinner and they have more valves in them. After those, you have lymphatic trunks. So these are formed when there are several, oops, I keep forgetting to advance my slides. These are formed when you have several collecting vessels coming together and uniting and forming these larger vessels, these larger lymphatic trunks. So these trunks are draining lymph from larger regions of the body. And then ultimately, all of these lymphatic trunks are going to carry lymph into lymphatic ducts. The lymphatic ducts are the largest lymphatic vessels, and there's only 2 of them. They're located in the thoracic region. I know this is a small picture, but the lymphatic ducts are right here and here. So here and here, one on each side. Okay, so there's just 2. These are the biggest ones of them all. So ultimately, all the lymph that's been drained is going to end up in one of these 2 ducts. There is the thoracic duct and there's the right lymphatic duct. So which side of the body do you think the right lymphatic duct is on? The right side, right? Yeah, that's obvious. So that one's on the right side. So that means the thoracic duct is the one on the left side. So thoracic duct, I'm just going to tell you just a quick description for each. The thoracic duct receives lymph that's coming from the upper left quadrant. And when I show you this picture, it'll make more sense. So it's receiving lymph from the upper left quadrant, the upper left portion of the body, and all regions below the diaphragm. So all of the areas shown in yellow, the lymph that's coming from all of these areas is going to end up in the thoracic duct. So when we say upper left quadrant, it's just referring to the upper left portion of the body. So it's like the left side of the head, left side of the neck, left side of the shoulder and the chest. And then all of the areas below the diaphragm, which is right underneath of the lungs and the rib cage. So the whole lower half of the body. Lymph coming from all those areas is going into this duct. And then one more thing to add, it empties lymph into the left subclavian vein. So I just typed subclavian vein for you. So you know spelling. So the subclavian veins are there's 2 of those. They run right underneath of the clavicle. So the thoracic duct carries that lymph that it's carrying. It brings it into the left subclavian vein. Okay, so now the other duct is the right lymphatic duct. It receives lymph from just the upper right quadrant of the body. So just the area shown in purple. and it empties that lymph into the right subclavian vein. Okay, so both of the lymphatic ducts are emptying lymph into each of the subclavian veins, just depending on which side of the body it's on. But they're draining different areas of the body. So just know that the right lymphatic duct drains only from the upper right area of the body. And the thoracic duct pretty much is draining lymph from everywhere else, from the upper left and then all like the whole lower half of the body. Okay. So we did talk a little bit about this next section here in your outline. The formation and the flow of lymph, but I'll go through that quickly. So just know that interstitial fluid is formed when blood plasma leaks out of capillaries. Blood plasma leaks out of capillaries. And that excess fluid is going to move into lymphatic capillaries. And at that point, that fluid is called lymph. As soon as it enters the lymphatic capillaries, now it's called lymph. So we can follow the sequence of fluid flow. We have blood moving through capillaries. Some of the fluid from the blood leaks out. Now that fluid is called interstitial fluid once it enters the interstitial spaces that are surrounding your tissues and your cells. Then that fluid is going to get sucked up by those lymphatic capillaries. So it goes into lymphatic vessels. And once that fluid moves into lymphatic vessels, it's called lymph. So it flows through the lymphatic vessels. Remember, you have lymphatic capillaries, collecting vessels. Ultimately, it goes into one of two lymphatic ducts. And then from there, it goes into one of the two subclavian veins. And it's returned to blood because it's blood that's flowing through the subclavian veins. So you have just returned this fluid that leaked out of the blood through capillaries, and now it's back in blood again. So you've put it back where it came from. Okay, so it's just a continuous cycle. Fluid leaks out of the blood, it moves into just the spaces surrounding your tissues, it gets sucked up by the lymphatic vessels, and then it gets sent back into the bloodstream again. It happens continuously all the time. The flow of lymph is maintained by two, not actual pumps like the heart, but two mechanisms that sort of act like pumps. There are skeletal muscle contractions. So whenever the muscles around lymphatic vessels contract and relax, it helps to squeeze the lymph through the lymphatic vessels. It helps just keep it flowing rather than just sitting in the vessels, which could happen if there's absolutely no muscle movement at all. And then the other thing is, as you breathe, as you inhale and exhale, the pressures in your thoracic cavity and in your abdominal cavity change. And whenever that pressure changes, it kind of draws fluid because things always move from higher pressure to lower pressure. So whenever the pressure gets higher in the abdominal cavity, lymph is going to flow up. It's going to go from high pressure to lower pressure. So just those changes that occur with breathing is going to help move lymph back up so it can get into the subclavian veins and be returned to the bloodstream. So one thing that you guys are seeing on the PowerPoint that is in your outline is an issue that can happen if you start to have fluid building up, and it's called edema. You guys have possibly heard of this term before. This is when interstitial fluid accumulates in tissue spaces. So remember, interstitial fluid is the fluid that normally does leak out of capillaries, but normally there's not too much of it. And normally it does get removed by the lymphatic capillaries. So it's not really a big deal. There are two major causes of edema. So think about why, like if you have fluid being formed, fluids draining out of capillaries, and then it should be moving right up into lymphatic vessels. Think about what might cause that to not happen properly. Why would fluid start to build up? Can you guys think of anything? There's really two main reasons, two main general causes of edema.
Would
Something
CHF
blocking it?
be a cause?
Yes,
Blocking, like
Yes.
blocking from getting through.
yes. So
Also,
go ahead.
a lymphatic being removed as well.
That is true. So that can happen, definitely. Let me get to that one in a second. Yes. So let me address the blockage first, because that is one. So yeah, one main cause could be if there's any kind of blockage or obstruction to the flow of lymph into the lymphatic capillaries. So if the capillaries are blocked for whatever reason, or there's an obstruction there. You're absolutely right about if there are, like lymph nodes and lymphatic vessels that have been removed from an area, that does cause edema. And the reason for that is kind of similar. It's not so much that there's a blockage, but you're actually lacking some vessels there that would normally be draining that fluid. So if you have less vessels in an area because some were removed, or you had to remove all of the vessels in an area, then absolutely that's going to cause some buildup of fluid in that particular area. So that could be a cause as well if vessels had to be removed. So that's good. There is one other one that actually is not on the back end, but it's kind of on the front end. And that is if you have high blood pressure in the capillaries. Normally it shouldn't be too high there, but if there's increased or greater, higher blood pressure than normal in your capillaries, think about what that would do to the amount of, or what impact that would have on the amount of fluid that is being pushed out of the capillaries. With greater pressure, you're going to be pushing more fluid out, like more fluid is going to be leaking out of the capillaries.
Not going to be able to handle it, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So your body's producing more interstitial fluid than it can drain at once. Like it's still being drained, but you're making more than your body can handle as far as draining it out goes. That's exactly right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could CHF be a cause for, I guess, fluid overload?
So that for sure causes, it depends, but that causes fluid buildup. I mean, the main place that you see that is in the lungs. So with congestive heart failure, you would see fluid building up in the lungs because there becomes like a backlog. So you see it more in the lungs because it's a smaller area than in the entire body, because it can kind of spread out.
Mhm.
But so you wouldn't see it it wouldn't be as pronounced because you wouldn't see it in one specific location of the body.
Oh,
But
okay.
in general, yeah, you could have sort of overall, like systemically, you would have increased fluid buildup a little bit. So you wouldn't have like a big swelling in one particular spot, most
Oh,
likely, but overall.
Okay.
But especially you do see it in the lungs from that loop. Like, you know how there's two circulatory loops, you have the pulmonary one and the systemic one. The main effects of CHF are in terms of that, like fluid buildup. You would see it with the pulmonary loop and fluid buildup in the lungs for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys all have good thoughts on that. You're all right. Everything you said. All right, so let's keep going. We are done with lymph itself, with the lymphatic vessels. So we're going to move on to the lymphoid or lymphatic. You can kind of use those terms interchangeably, lymphoid and lymphatic cells and tissues throughout the body. So the lymphoid cells, they will kind of fight off anything that seems abnormal, that looks like it doesn't belong in the body, any foreign invader. So there's two main types of cells that we'll talk about for now. There are lymphocytes. These are like the main fighter cells of the immune system. And they are white blood cells. This picture here shows you the 5 different types of white blood cells. And you can see lymphocytes are one of those types. So these are white blood cells that are really like the main fighters of the immune system. And ultimately, you guys have probably heard of B cells and T cells. Lymphocytes, as they develop, they will eventually become either B cells or T cells. So those are 2 specific types of lymphocytes, the B and the T cells. Okay, and another type of lymphoid cell are the macrophages. So in A&P1, you would have probably learned about phagocytes. I don't know if you remember what you learned, but you probably talked about them at least at some point. So phagocytes are basically they're like typically pretty large cells that will go up to it could even be a part of your body or a foreign cell. But if there's something that doesn't belong that needs to be broken down, they'll go up to it, they'll surround it, they will kind of ingest whatever it is, and then they will break it down. But they actually like use digestive enzymes to break down and destroy foreign material or anything in the body that needs to be destroyed. So macrophages are just really large phagocytes. They are phagocytes, and they destroy any foreign material or foreign invaders that don't belong in the body.
Sorry, can you go back to lymphocytes, please?
Sure. What about them? Just
The descriptive part.
okay.
Please.
I said a bunch of things. I said they're a type of white blood cell. They'll ultimately become B cells or T cells. They are like the main cells that fight off foreign invaders as part of the immune system. Those are
Thank you.
I think the main things that they said. Okay, so you've got the lymphocytes and you've got macrophages that are cells that are part of the lymphatic system. And lymphoid tissues provide a place for these cells to basically hang out, and a location for these cells to make copies of themselves. So the lymphoid tissue is often kind of grouped into, and it forms a lymphoid organ. So these lymphoid organs are grouped into two categories, which is what you're seeing here on the PowerPoint. There are primary lymphoid organs and secondary ones. The primary ones are where B cells and T cells mature. And remember, B cells and T cells are lymphocytes. They're B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes. So these two the two locations that are primary lymphoid organs are red bone marrow and the thymus. And we are going to go through the various lymphoid organs. I'll give you a description in case you're wondering, like, what the heck is the thymus? I'm going to go through that in a second. So those are the two primary lymphoid organs, and then the secondary lymphoid organs. These are where B and T cells will go later to become activated and to actually start functioning. So they start out in the primary lymphoid organs. That's where they grow and develop. And then they'll move to secondary lymphoid organs, which is where they actually start being able to function. And these secondary lymphoid organs are all the lymph nodes throughout the body, your spleen, and the abbreviation is MALT. That stands for, and you don't necessarily have to write it right now because I have it written down later in your outline. MALT is mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. So it's lymphoid tissue that's part of a mucous membrane. And one example of that would be your tonsils that you're probably familiar with, the tonsils that are in your mouth and in your throat. But again, we're going to talk about all of those organs right now, all those various lymphoid organs. Okay, starting with the lymph nodes. So let me scroll down in the outline. All right, so lymph nodes, just a quick description, let me show you here. This is what a real lymph node looks like. If you look at the PowerPoint, that's an actual picture of one. They are small bean-shaped organs that are found in groups along lymphatic vessels. So there will be like clusters of them located in various places along lymphatic vessels.
Can you repeat that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they are small, almost like kidney bean shaped structures that are found in clusters along lymphatic vessels. So usually you have like groups of them, not just one by itself. So in most places in the body, they're found pretty deep within tissues, but there are 3 places where they are closer to the surface, where sometimes if they get inflamed, you can actually feel or see them. So the 3 places where you have like big groups of them, where you can often see them if they get swollen or inflamed, are the inguinal region. Do you guys remember what inguinal refers to? What region of the body?
Growing.
Groin. Mm-hmm. Axillary. Do you guys remember that?
Armpit.
Armpit. Yep. And cervical. So neck. So those are the 3 places where you do have like big groups of lymph nodes that are close to the surface. Okay, and their function is that the macrophages, remember macrophages, I can write that again for you. Macrophages are the big phagocytes. So macrophages within the lymph nodes, because there are macrophages that just live in these lymph nodes. macrophages will filter lymph. As the lymph passes through the lymph nodes. To remove any foreign material or microorganisms that might be in that lymph. Okay, so they're basically like filtering out any foreign stuff, any foreign invaders, bacteria, any kind of microorganism, removing it from the lymph as the lymph is passing through these lymph nodes. Okay, the next lymphoid organ that's in your outline is the spleen. The spleen is shown here. It is the largest lymphoid organ. It's about the size of your fist. And it's very vascular. And when I say that, I mean that it has a really large blood supply. There's a lot of blood vessels going in and out of the spleen. Okay, so location for the spleen, you guys can see the location here. It's towards the left side of the abdominal cavity. It's to the left of the stomach. The other organ you're seeing here is the stomach. And it's located like right around the diaphragm. The main functions for the spleen, there's actually several that you can list here. Number one, it removes old or defective, so like non-functioning blood cells. From the blood. And also removes any foreign material from blood. Okay, so number one, the spleen is basically filtering the blood. It's removing old, worn out, defective blood cells, and it's removing any foreign material. Another thing is that it will store the byproducts of red blood cells after they're broken down. So it stores the byproducts of red blood cells after they're broken down so that they can be reused. Okay, so remember I said that the spleen will remove any like old worn out blood cells from the blood. And one of those blood cell types could be red blood cells. Those are the main blood cell that is found in blood. So those red blood cells, if they're old and defective and not working, they'll get broken down, but the spleen will actually save those breakdown products so they can be recycled. They can be reused to make brand new red blood cells. So that's another thing the spleen does. The spleen also stores platelets. Platelets are another type of blood cell. So the spleen can store some platelets. Okay, and one more thing. Oops. So one last function is that this is the location of red blood cell production before birth. So in a fetus, this is a location where red blood cells get produced.
You said before production?
Before birth,
Okay.
this is where they get produced. So after birth, like in us, the spleen is not making red blood cells, but before birth, it does. Okay, so one final thing related to the spleen that is kind of significant is that the spleen can be removed from the body. It's one organ that you can actually live without and live pretty normally without. The term splenectomy is the surgical removal of the spleen. And I mean, you wouldn't just remove it like for fun. You would do it if it was damaged, if it was severely inflamed, and you have the potential of it rupturing. So it is often damaged if there is any kind of abdominal trauma. It's one of the organs that's most likely damaged because it is a soft organ. The liver's hard, but the spleen is very soft. So it can get lacerated easily. It can get just any kind of damage. It can get damaged really easily. So it can be removed from the body. And the reason why you can live pretty normally without the spleen is because other organs and other structures, the main one is the liver, can take over some of the functions of the spleen, or they already perform some of the functions of the spleen. So the liver also does the same first function that we listed for the spleen, that it removes old worn out blood cells from circulation. The liver does that too, normally. So you have two organs performing that function normally. If you remove the spleen, fortunately, you still have the liver that can perform that function. So, I mean, obviously it's better to have two organs doing that than one. It's more effective. So you might see that immune functions will decrease a little bit with the removal of the spleen. There is an increased risk of infection, specifically blood infection, because the spleen does filter out foreign material and things from the blood. But I mean, overall, you can generally live a pretty normal, healthy life without the spleen. Okay, so we're getting close to being done. We have two more lymphoid organs to cover. The next one is the thymus. So let me show you that here on the PowerPoint. This right here, this orange structure in between the lungs is the thymus. So for description and location, it is an organ that has two lobes. You can kind of see that it has like two parts to it. So it has two lobes. And it's found behind the sternum. It's behind the sternum and in between the lungs. So it's kind of an interesting organ because it starts off like normal. In infants, it's pretty large and it will continue to grow until puberty. But then once an individual reaches puberty, this organ actually starts to shrink. Instead of continuing to grow, it starts to get smaller and smaller. So by the time you are, like 40, it's like half of its original size. It still functions though. Like you can still have the lymphocytes come here and mature. So it still performs its function. It's just it's a weird thing. It's an interesting thing that happens to it. So as far as the function goes, this is where the T cells, T lymphocytes mature. This is where they go to develop. This is where they mature, where they develop, where they grow.
Is that the function for the thymus?
Yes.
It's where the T cells grow?
Yep. Okay. I just always remember thymus starts with T. So that's the place for the T cells. That's where the T cells mature and grow. All right. So last things are the mucosa. Remember the MALT that I talked about? And I said I was going to describe that later. So MALT stands for mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. And it is basically where you have lymphoid tissue that's associated with a mucous membrane. It's like embedded in a mucous membrane. And there's two specific places that we're going to talk about. Number one is the tonsils. And the second place is in the intestines. So we'll get to that in a sec. First, we'll look at the tonsils. And for their description, these are rings of lymphoid tissue in the throat. So they're rings of lymphoid tissue in the throat. And their function is already in your outline. They will remove foreign invaders, pathogens that may have entered the throat, the upper throat, which is called the pharynx. Either through the air that you've inhaled or foods or liquids that you've ingested. And there are 3 types of tonsils. There are typically in pairs, except for the lingual tonsils. There's just one of those. But there's a pair of palatine tonsils. They are located like on either side of the mouth, all the way at the back of the oral cavity. So you can see one of the palatine tonsils here on the one side. It's all the way in the back of the mouth, back of the oral cavity. Then the next ones are the lingual tonsils. When you hear the term lingual, it always refers to the tongue. The lingual tonsils are kind of embedded like at the base of the tongue. So right here, this whole structure right here is the tongue. So here's the lingual tonsil. And then pharyngeal tonsils are up high. They're all the way up in the nasopharynx. That's the uppermost portion of your throat. And it's actually kind of behind your nasal cavity. Some people have heard the term adenoids used. So these pharyngeal tonsils are the adenoids, if that term is more familiar to you. So they're all the way up here in the upper throat. Okay. And now we are to the last, the other example of MALT, the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue. And that is Peyer's patches and the appendix. So for the description for Peyer's patches, these are just clusters of lymphoid tissue. In the wall of the small intestine. And And the function is just to destroy foreign invaders, pathogens that may have entered the digestive tract. Okay, and then the appendix is, so you can see a picture of it here. It's almost like the size and shape of your pinky finger. That's pretty much what your appendix looks like. And it hangs off of the end of your large intestine, like it's on the right side of your body. So just know that it's a small projection that hangs off of the first part of your large intestine. And it contains lymphoid tissue. Okay, and then the function for the appendix is exactly the same as what I said for the Peyer's patches. It will just destroy any foreign invader, any pathogen that has entered the digestive tract. Okay. So we have gotten all the way through the lymphoid, let me see, or the lymphatic system PowerPoint. Why don't we take a break like we did last time, just to give you guys a sec to get up, walk around, get a drink, whatever you need to do. And then we'll come back and work a little bit on the respiratory system outline. My watch says that it's 10:28. Do you guys want to take until 10:35? That's like a nice even number. So come back by 10:35 and we'll work on the other outline. Okay, I will see you in a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to share this next PowerPoint. Here's the respiratory system. Okay, and it's 10:35, so I will get started up again. I'm just going to start right at the beginning of the respiratory system outline. Now for this one, there are 2 recorded lectures that I have posted in this folder in D2L. Like, it's where you found the last ones. It's like part of the web page that I made for the respiratory system. They're embedded right in there. So I'm not going to go over what I go over in those recorded lectures, just because that doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to go through, try to get through as much of the other stuff as I can. So I will start at the beginning. Let me see, with just like an overview of the respiratory system, the main functions, and then start to go through some of the anatomy. All right, so basically the respiratory system consists of all of the structures and organs that are bringing oxygen into the lungs and sending carbon dioxide out of the lungs. And these structures, respiratory structures, are divided based on their location or their structure and based on their function. So structurally, we have the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. And then functionally, there's the conducting division, which is all the tubes and cavities that move air in and out of the lungs. So any structure that's involved in moving air. And the respiratory division includes all regions where gas exchange occurs.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the conducting division one more time?
Yeah, it's all of the structures that are really just moving air in and out of the lungs.
Okay, thank you.
The things that are carrying air only. But respiratory division is where gas exchange occurs. Okay, so the four main processes that are involved in respiration are, first of all, pulmonary ventilation, which is breathing. So that is just the movement of air in and out of the lungs. Movement of air in and out of the lungs. Then there's two types of respiration, which is really gas exchange. There's first external respiration, which is the movement of oxygen. The movement of oxygen from the lungs into the blood. And the movement of carbon dioxide the opposite way. So it's the movement of carbon dioxide from the blood into the lungs. Okay, so oxygen is going from lungs into the blood. Carbon dioxide is going the opposite direction, from blood into the lungs. Okay, then while these gases are in the body, they have to be carried somehow. So that's the transport of gases. Blood is doing this. So blood transports oxygen from the lungs to all tissues and transports CO2, carbon dioxide, from the tissues into the lungs.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, so blood is carrying oxygen from the lungs to every tissue and CO2 from tissues to the lungs. So they're always going in opposite directions. Oxygen is going towards your tissues because it's needed by the tissues in order to function. And CO2 is going the other way. CO2 is leaving the tissues and going into the lungs. All right. And then the last function is internal respiration, which is the movement of oxygen from the blood into tissues and of carbon dioxide from tissues into blood. So again, it's the exact opposite. Okay, so basically you have breathing to bring oxygen in to the lungs. Then you have gas exchange at the lungs. So you have to move oxygen from the lungs into the blood. At the same time, it's trading places with carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is moving from the blood into the lungs. So then you can just exhale it next time you breathe. And then while those gases are in your body, they're transported by the blood. So oxygen is moving like deeper into the body. It's going towards your tissues, while carbon dioxide is being carried away from the tissues because it's a waste product that you want to get rid of ultimately. And then internal respiration is gas exchange at the tissue level. So that's the actual movement of oxygen into the tissue and carbon dioxide out of a tissue. Okay, and those are further explained later on in the outline: external respiration and internal respiration, and transport of gases, like specifically how oxygen and carbon dioxide are carried. That is discussed too. So here is the next section is just going through a lot of the anatomy of the respiratory system. So I'm going to try to go through that pretty quickly because anatomy is the easy part. The physiology is usually the trickier part. So we're starting with the upper respiratory tract with the nose and the sinuses that are associated with the nasal cavity. So you can see the external nose here. It's composed of bone and cartilage. The blue stuff that you see is hyaline cartilage. The external nares are your nostrils. So obviously, you know what nostrils are, the openings at the bottom of your nose, the inferior side. The nasal cavity is internal. You can see the nasal cavity here when you look at a sagittal section of the head. Let's see, the roof of the nasal cavity, so that's all the way up here. It's formed by bone. It's the bones of the skull, the ethmoid bone, the sphenoid bone, they're up here. The bottom of the nasal cavity is formed by the palate. There is the hard palate. So this is also the roof of your mouth. It's the bottom of your nasal cavity and the top of your oral cavity. So hard palate is the anterior portion here that's made of bone. So that's why it is hard. And then the soft palate is back here. It's the posterior portion, which is made of muscle. So hard palate is made of bone. It's the anterior. Soft palate is posterior. It's the back portion made of muscle. Okay, internally there's a septum. You guys remember in the heart, you had a septum that divided the heart into two halves. And we have the same thing here. The nasal septum divides the nose into, it divides the nose or nasal cavity into right and left sides. And the septum is made of bone and cartilage. Okay, and then you can see the nasal cavity leads directly into the pharynx, which is the upper throat located all the way back here. The opening from the nasal cavity into the pharynx is called the posterior nasal aperture. An aperture is like a fancy name for just an opening. So that is the opening right here from the nasal cavity into the pharynx. There are nasal concha. These are these bulges that you kind of see sticking out into the nasal cavity. So they are just projections that stick out from the walls of the nasal cavity. Okay, and then lastly are the sinuses. You guys can see the sinuses from this picture here. And you have all that information in your outline already. Sinuses are spaces that are found within bone. These are spaces that are found within the facial bones and the cranial bones. So let's get to the functions of the nose and the nasal cavity. There's several. First of all, it provides an airway. It's an airway for respiration. Okay, second thing is that the nasal cavity warms, moistens, and filters incoming air. Okay. Third thing is that the nasal cavity contains, and I might have to spell this one for you. I'm going to write it on here. It contains olfactory receptors. Do you remember from A&P 1 learning about special senses? What does olfaction refer to?
Smell?
Yeah. So the olfactory receptors are for smell. Okay, and then one more thing. The nasal cavity helps to modify sound for proper speech. So think about, like, if you hold your nose and you talk, you sound weird, right? So it like kind of provides an area for sound to resonate as it's coming out. So it just helps with proper speech. Okay, so that is it for the nose. We can move on to the pharynx, still part of the upper respiratory tract. The pharynx is the upper throat. And you can see the pharynx is divided into 3 sections. The entire pharynx goes from here, all the way up here, all the way down to here. So I'll just go through the sections really quickly, one at a time. The nasopharynx is this uppermost section shown in that like reddish color. It is located right behind the nasal cavity. What is passing through the nasopharynx? What goes in through your, normally, goes in through your nostrils and through your nasal cavity and through here? Air, yeah. So normally this is just a passageway for air. There is, if you look all the way up here, there's one set of tonsils that's located in this area. It's the pharyngeal tonsils. I can spell that for you here. Pharyngeal tonsils are located, it's right here. You can see one of them right here. There's another thing you can see here. This contains the opening of the pharyngotympanic tubes, which you would have learned about in A&P 1 when you learned about the ear and hearing. So the opening of this tube is here, and that tube connects the throat to the middle ear. If you remember learning about that, it's also called the eustachian tube. So it connects the upper throat to the middle ear to equalize pressure so your eardrum doesn't rupture. All right, so that's just another significant thing that's in this area. And that's it for the nasopharynx. If we move down, you have the oropharynx, which is the middle portion. It's located directly behind the oral cavity. You have the description in there. So one thing to add is, what do you think this is a passageway for? It's behind the mouth.
Food?
Yeah, it's a passageway for food. Also for liquids, it's basically for anything that you've ingested through the mouth. So that would be foods or liquids. But also, what else is it a passageway for?
Air and
Yeah.
and when you breathe out.
Right. So air in or out. Yes. It's a passageway for air because you can breathe through your mouth as well. Plus, any air that you've inhaled through your nose is going to end up coming down from the nasopharynx through the oropharynx. So this is a passageway for foods, liquids, and for air, just like the nasopharynx, both for air. The other two sets of tonsils are located here. You can see them on the picture. So here you have the palatine. I'll write those two, palatine tonsils and the lingual tonsil. Those are here. Here's the lingual, here's the palatine. They're in that area. And then all the way at the bottom in the darker blue color is the laryngopharynx. So this is the most inferior portion of the pharynx. It is passageway for the same things as the oropharynx. It is a passageway for foods, for liquids, and for air. And right below, if you look at this picture, right below the laryngopharynx, there is a split into two passageways. So up here, there's only a single passageway. It's the pharynx. You have the oropharynx, the laryngopharynx, but now there's a split. There's a tube that goes in the front, and there's a tube that heads towards the back. The esophagus is the posterior tube, which is a passageway for food and liquid. The larynx is the anterior tube, which is a passageway for air. Okay. So now we are down to the larynx. And now this is considered the lower respiratory tract. Everything from here down is the lower respiratory tract. Okay, so the larynx is what you're looking at here. This is an anterior view looking at it from the front. This is if you look at it from the back. It is only about 2 inches long, so it's a small section, and it has several functions that you can list here in your outline. The first function is that it holds the airway permanently open. It holds the airway permanently open. The second function is that it channels, or it sends food and air into the proper tubes. And the third thing is voice production. The larynx is also known as the voice box because this is where voice production occurs. Okay, so the entire larynx, all the blue stuff that you're seeing is cartilage. The whole larynx is pretty much made up of cartilage. And these different pieces of cartilage have different names. There's 6 different pieces of cartilage that make up the larynx. And it's the first 3 that you'll really be asked mostly about. The first 3 are the only ones that are on your midterm lab practical list that you'll have to identify on a model. The other 3 are not on your list for the practical. So I'm going to really focus on the first 3. That first one is called thyroid cartilage. And this is the hyaline cartilage. So hyaline is a type of cartilage. I'll write it down here. So you may or may not remember that from A&P 1. Hyaline cartilage is a type of cartilage that's a little bit flexible, but it also is pretty strong too. So it forms the front wall of the larynx.
Sorry, are we on page 4?
We are on page 4. Yep. At the very top.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So if you're looking at the diagram here, this big piece of cartilage is the thyroid cartilage. And this is known as the Adam's apple. This is the piece of cartilage that you can sometimes see sticking out in the throat. It is more pronounced in males. For females, you don't usually have that sticking out so much, but you know, you sometimes see it in the front of people's necks. And that is what you're seeing. You're seeing this big piece of cartilage here. Okay.
What was that? What did you say about the hyaline cartilage?
I just said it's a type of cartilage that's it's strong, but it's also a little bit flexible.
Okay. And this is what this is made out of?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, next is the epiglottis. The epiglottis, so look at the back of the larynx. Look at this structure right here. It looks kind of like a spoon, almost like a curved spoon. This is the epiglottis. It is a pretty flexible piece of cartilage. So this is actually elastic cartilage, which is the most flexible type of cartilage. And what you can add for the epiglottis is that it acts as a lid to cover the glottis, which is a term I am about to define in a minute. So it acts as a lid to cover the glottis when swallowing food or liquid. Okay, so I'm showing you the side view for a reason. Let me define the glottis, which is the next term in your outline, and then I'll show you on this diagram what the epiglottis is doing. So the glottis is the opening within the larynx. Which contains the vocal cords.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yep, it's the opening within the larynx, and it contains the vocal cords. So I wanted to show you guys the side view so that you can see the larynx is not like a solid piece of cartilage. You have an opening here, like it has a hollow center. So the glottis is this opening right here underneath. This is the epiglottis. And underneath it is this opening that leads down into the larynx and then down into the airway that follows. And this is also right where your vocal cords happen to be. So I am actually going to go back if I can. Shoot. Here we go. No, I want this picture. Okay. So I want to go back to this picture so I can show you from on here. This, do you guys see this thin line of blue? That represents the epiglottis. So this can fold down and it can basically, it can cover this opening here. It covers the glottis. So this will fold down and it will cover that opening whenever you're swallowing food or liquid. And that forces that food and or liquid, whatever it is, to go into that posterior tube, which is the esophagus. That is the tube that's meant for foods and liquids that you're ingesting. Okay, so it ensures that foods and liquids don't go down what we say it as being the wrong tube. So it ensures that those things aren't going into your airway, which could be dangerous. It could cause choking, first of all, if it's a solid piece of food. So the epiglottis is always going to close off. It's going to bend down. It's going to close off the glottis. It's going to close off that opening that leads down into your airways whenever you're swallowing food and liquid. Okay. All right. Let me go through really quickly the last three pieces of cartilage. We don't really focus on them too much. But the cricoid cartilage, this is one that you would have on your midterm lab practical list. Oops, let me go back. The cricoid cartilage is a ring of cartilage that forms the bottom portion. It's a ring of cartilage that forms the bottom of the larynx. It forms the bottom portion. So you can kind of see it here in the front. If you look at the back picture, you can see it goes all the way around. It's in the back. So that is the cricoid cartilage, just forms the bottom portion. Here it is again. You can see it from the side. This whole thing here, and it does go all the way around. It forms a ring around the bottom of the larynx. Okay, now the other three pieces of cartilage, the arytenoids, the corniculate, and the cuneiform cartilage, these are all little paired pieces of cartilage. So there's two little pieces on either side for all of these. So arytenoid cartilage, you can see it here. You're not ever going to have to identify it on a diagram, but just showing you anyway, because it's here. It directly attaches to the vocal cords. And it can cause the vocal cords to move. So it's directly attached to the vocal cords and it can cause them to move. Okay. And then the other two, these are really small. These are both, again, paired little pieces of cartilage. And they just form, you can see the little pieces like right here and right here. They just form like this, the lateral wall. They're up against the lateral wall or the side of the larynx. Okay, so finishing up the larynx real quick, regarding voice production, there are what are called false vocal cords, and there are true vocal cords, the real vocal cords. So the vestibular folds are the false vocal cords. They are the top little line that you see here. The vocal folds are right underneath, and those are actually the true vocal cords. It's a pair of ligaments, so there's actually two of them. You're seeing just one half of the larynx with this view, so you're only seeing one, but there are two vocal cords. I'm going to show you what they look like from the top down. So if you use like a laryngoscope and you look down into the larynx, this is what they would look like. In the white things that you're seeing are the vocal folds. These are the true vocal cords. So you can see that there's two of them. Okay, and the term phonation in your outline right below, it means the production of sound. And that occurs when air moves through the middle of the vocal cords. So when air moves through this space in between them. Okay, that's when sound is produced, when air moves through that opening or through that space between the vocal cords. And you can produce different like pitches of sound depending on how tight the vocal cords are being pulled or how loose they are. Like if there's no tension on them, then they're more relaxed. So if they are being pulled tight, that would produce a high pitch sound. If they are relaxed, it produces a lower pitch sound. Okay, so in this diagram or this picture of a model, this is very, very similar to the model that we have in our lab that I showed the Tuesday lab group that just had lab, and that I will show you guys next Tuesday if you're in group B. So this top part right here and right here, all the way down to here is the larynx, which we just talked about. Right below the larynx, so from here to here, is the trachea. So that's the next structure that we're going to talk about. It is like a 5-inch tube roughly. We call it the windpipe sometimes, if you've heard of that name. It is located anterior to the esophagus. So it travels down the neck and it's anterior, it's in front of the esophagus. Okay, I already have the 4 layers of tissue that form the wall of the trachea described in the outline, so I'm not going to go through all that. I don't want to waste time. If you go down, look below this diagram that you have in your outline, you will see a place to write the function of the trachea. And the function of the trachea is very simple. It just serves as a passageway for air. Okay. So in this big picture, you can see, now we're putting things together. You can see the larynx, which it goes from just here to here. This is the bottom. Here's the trachea. That's the windpipe we just talked about. And at its bottom of the trachea, it splits into two branches. All of the branches off of the trachea are called the bronchial tree or the bronchi. Okay. So all these branches are bronchi. They form the bronchial tree. Looks like an upside down tree, kind of. So the primary bronchi are the first two branches that enter each lung. So primary bronchi are the two main branches that enter each lung. So they're carrying air into the lungs. The left makes sense. The left primary bronchus goes into the left lung. The right primary bronchus goes into the right lung. They are slightly different. The right bronchus, primary bronchus, is a little bit wider and more vertical than the left one. So the opening is a little bit bigger. It's a little wider and it's more vertical. Doesn't really look like it here. It's hard to tell, but it is just slightly. So if you do aspirate, so that means like a solid object goes into your airway. If you aspirate an object, it is more likely to wind up on the right side in the right primary bronchus than on the left side, because the opening is wider and it's a little bit more vertical. So it's easier for that to get lodged like down into that one. So from there, after the primary bronchi, then you have secondary bronchi. These are just the branches of the primary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi are the branches of the secondary bronchi. So they just keep branching and branching into smaller and smaller branches. Then finally, you have bronchioles. These are the smallest passageways. And the terminal bronchioles are the smallest of these. So they're the tiniest ones all the way out here. So they just keep branching into smaller and smaller branches. And these are all just carrying air through the lungs. They are passageways for air. Once you get down, so you can kind of tell, do you guys see these rings of cartilage here? On the trachea, there's still rings of cartilage on the primary bronchi, on the secondary bronchi, on the tertiary bronchi. You have rings of cartilage that are holding these airways open all the way through all the bronchi I've discussed so far. On the primary, the secondary, the tertiary, the bronchioles, there are rings of cartilage holding them open. But as soon as you get down to the respiratory bronchioles, which are, that's the next section in your outline, these are not held open by rings of cartilage. Instead, their walls, and here's a picture of the respiratory bronchioles here. Their walls have smooth muscle. There's a smooth muscle layer in the wall of these respiratory bronchioles. So it's kind of like a blood vessel. They can dilate and get bigger, or they can constrict and get smaller and regulate airflow by doing that. So these are the ones that carry air directly into these structures here, these circles, which are called alveoli. And I know we're running short on time, but let me just finish talking about alveoli. These are thin, very thin walled air sacs. So they look like a big bunch of grapes, kind of. These are the alveoli. So these are microscopic. If you were to cut into a lung and look at it, you would not be able to see these with the naked eye. You would only be able to see them under a microscope. They're located at the ends of those respiratory bronchioles. You can kind of see what it would look like here. You got these big bunches of alveoli, and they are filled with air. In your outline, you can read that they come in direct contact with the capillaries that flow through your lungs. So here is one of those alveoli, and here is a capillary. So you have capillaries that are they're passing right next to the alveoli. And this is where gas exchange occurs. You have air in the alveoli. So oxygen is the main gas that is in here. And you also have gases flowing through your blood. So it's in between these two structures that you have gas exchange. This, if you guys look in your outline, this right here is called the alveolar capillary membrane, which is also just called the respiratory membrane. So it's this very thin membrane where you have gas exchange between the air in here and the blood that's flowing through this capillary. And that membrane consists of two parts. It just consists of the wall of the alveolus and the wall of the capillary. Okay. So it's 11:19. We technically have 1 minute left. So if you guys have to leave, I go right ahead. But if you want to hang on for like a couple more minutes, I will just finish page 7 so we can get through just the end of the alveoli. There's 3 different types of cells that are in the wall of an alveolus. Let me show. So on this diagram, you can see that there are type 1 alveolar cells. And these are, if you look at this diagram, it's just all these tan cells. And these are just the epithelial cells that form the wall of an alveolus. So these are just the epithelial cells that form the wall of an alveolus. Okay, so they make up the majority of an alveolus. It's all the epithelial cells that form the wall. But kind of scattered throughout, there are 2 other types of cells. There are type 2 alveolar cells, which are also known as septal cells. And these secrete a substance called, and I'm going to write it here for you. They secrete a substance called surfactant. I typed it onto the PowerPoint. So they secrete surfactant, which reduces surface tension in the lungs. Okay, so that's a very, very important substance. Surfactant kind of coats the alveoli and it reduces surface tension. To know why that's important, let me just tell you what surface tension is and why it's good that surfactant reduces surface tension. So surface tension, and there's a place for a definition right here in your outline. Surface tension is a force that pulls the alveoli inward. It is a force that pulls the alveoli inward, which can cause them to collapse. Okay, so here's a really good analogy. Think about a balloon filled with air. So you blow up a balloon, the balloon is filled with air, the balloon is expanded, it's round. It is surface tension that, think about it then, if you let air out of the balloon, what happens to the balloon? Does it stay like this? No, it'll collapse, it'll kind of shrink down again. That's because of surface tension. It's pulling inward and it's collapsing the balloon. You actually don't want that to happen with these air sacs in your lungs, because if they collapse when air leaves them, like when you exhale, it makes it a lot harder to bring air back in. Like you would have to, it would just be harder to breathe again. So you never want your alveoli to collapse. And what prevents that from happening is surfactant. So surfactant, and this is the second thing right underneath surface tension, surfactant reduces surface tension. And what you can add here is that it reduces surface tension so that the alveoli don't collapse. When air leaves them, like when you exhale. So even when you exhale and air is moving out of the alveoli, like with a balloon, if you let air out, the alveoli are not going to collapse because of surfactant. They are going to stay open. They're going to stay like inflated, which is a good thing. You want that to happen. So that's really important. You'll definitely be asked on the test, what is surfactant? How does it impact surface tension? It's a good thing to know, important thing to know. Okay, I'm sorry. One more thing, the alveolar macrophages are the last little type of cell that you have in the alveoli. Remember, we talked about macrophages with the lymphatic system. Macrophages are big phagocytes. Remember what phagocytes do? They will just surround and destroy any foreign material, any pathogens, any bacteria that may have gotten into the lungs. So that's good. They're protecting the lungs in that way. If you inhale anything that's bad, that's foreign material that shouldn't be in the lungs, that could cause harm, any bacteria, hopefully these macrophages can destroy that before it could potentially get into your bloodstream and spread through your body. Okay, so we got through that section. In my recorded lectures, I have one that goes through the whole process of breathing, inhalation and exhalation. So all of that is taken care of. There are a couple parts in this outline that you guys will have to use the book potentially to fill in. A lot of it's filled in for you, but there might be some places where it's not. And if you have any questions about it, I also have a recorded lecture on oxygen transport in the blood. So that whole thing is covered. So that doesn't leave a whole lot. But If you have any questions about anything, let me know. All right, I'm gonna let you guys go because I went 7 minutes over time already. But I'll see Group B on Tuesday. I'll be in touch with you guys and just reach out if you need anything from me, okay? Thanks for coming. I'm gonna post the recorded lecture as soon as we're done here. Okay, you guys good? See you
Yes.
later.
All right, bye.